that on borrowing $3,000 from her banking system. James C. Penney used his banking concept to keep J.C. Penney's afloat during the Depression. Ray Kroc used his banking concept to create McDonald's. So this stuff has been around for quite some time. It's just now, I'd say, well, I'll give it a number of years, but 20 years or so, these policies now have started to get into the mainstream when you can talk to the right person. There are a lot of advisors out there today that say that they do these types of policies, but then what you wind up finding is an organization want to have something like this. Well, the problem today with the average American is that we're paying out 34 cents of every dollar that we spend is going toward debt to pay off that interest that you're paying out to somebody else. Taxes, 40 cents of every dollar is going toward taxes. And that's not just income tax, because you might say, well, I'm not in a 40% income tax. No, I'm not talking about just income taxes. That's talking about that cable bill tax, the cell phone tax, the gas tax, that I didn't know there was a tax on that tax. It comes to about 40 cents for every dollar that happens. That leaves us 23% or 23 cents for every dollar to spend. And the average American saves about 3 cents of that dollar. So most Americans just don't have the money to do something extra with when you look at these things. So what we've come up with the system that we're teaching people is that you can actually reduce the amount of debt that you have. You can almost eliminate that very quickly. And I'm talking about within seconds. You have a deposit. We don't own the bank, so we're going into the bank to put our money into the bank. They're actually borrowing the money from you, and they're paying you an interest rate for using your money. Now, it's a very little interest rate. Some of that is usually about 1% or less that you're getting for the most part. But they turn around and they loan that money out to other borrowers that borrowed the money from them. And they're going to get 6%, 10%, 18%, 20%, whatever it is, car loans, credit cards, student loans, all these different things that are being borrowed from the bank. Now, you think about those percentages I just put out to you. If they're paying out 1%, less than, we'll use 1%. We know they're not getting that, but let's say they're using 1% to pay it out to you for the privilege of using your money. And then they turn around and get, let's just use 6% from the individual that they just get a car loan for, that's borrowing the money to purchase that car. That's a 5% spread that the bank just earned on your money. So if you think about that now, they started at 1%, they're paying out, yet they earned 5%. That is a 500% gain when they do the spread. So when you talk about, well, what kind of interest can I earn on these types of systems? If you understand banks and how they make their money and can create that spread, that's 500% is what I just explained to you. You don't understand those numbers. If I had 1 and I made 2, that's 100%. If I did 3, I just tripled that. That's 300%. So understand here that if you can get in your head that you can create the spread, that's where the money is made. And the process is you getting out of the mindset that you have to hoard up all this money and keep it somewhere in hopes of one day that I might have enough to retire on. You got to get out of that mindset. You see, that mindset that I'm just speaking of here is the difference between a utilization mindset versus an accumulation mindset. You see, the accumulation mindset of what I just described to you is like it's just like the Dead Sea. There's no flow, there's no motion, there's no life at all to it. It entails setting money aside in an investment vehicle and hoping that it grows enough so that one day in the future, you can have enough to use it. That is accumulation mindset. You got to get away from that. You've got to get to an understanding of the utilization mindset of using your money. Just like the Amazon River. It's a huge flowing body of water, full of life. Civilizations were built around it because of the richness of the moving, flowing water. So when you think about that with your money, utilization allows you to both prepare for the future and live wealthier today. It's far superior than just saying I'm going to accumulate money for myself. So,
well,
go ahead.
We got a question. Someone says, well, what would be the best policy, whole life or IUL?
It's the toss-up. Honestly, it's what works best for you. I don't have any particular preference between those two. Those are the two that you would use, a whole life or a IUL would be the two vehicles that we do use for it. But this is the thing. If you're using your policy to pay off debt, and you're looking at a situation here where you have, including your home, you got $100,000 you own your home, plus you've got the car loan, you've got the student loans, you've got the credit cards, furniture bills, all these different things. You need to be in a whole life policy to where you can have certain guarantees built into the system that we can actually show you a step-by-step process, because we know what we're going to get from that policy. We already know. So when we factor in what we know into what your debt situation might be that we need to help you get paid off, now we can give you a structure of how to get that stuff paid off in a systematic fashion where you actually know almost to the day of when this bill is going to be paid off completely. So when you start doing that with that whole life policy, now you can create that spread because you already know what you're getting from the policy. It's going to be pretty much a guaranteed 4% today. That's what they're paying out, plus dividends, because we do use dividend paying policies that are structured correctly. Remember that, structured correctly. That's very important. So when we know these things that we're going to be getting from that policy, and then we understand how we can create those spreads through the debt payoff, because that's how you create the spread, is through you paying off the debt and paying that back into your policy once the policy is paid off the debt, paying the monthly amounts that you were paying in that debt, paying it back into the policy. Now you know what your spread is. So you can create wealth by paying off debt. And I can break that down for you even more just through a concept here that I want to talk about in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about IULs. Well, IULs have a little bit of risk to it. There is a floor, which is good. Sorry, am I still here?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit.
Okay, sorry about that. Just I tried to call him on my phone here.
No, you're fine. You were saying that, with an IUL and the risk.
Yeah, with an IUL, there is a floor. So the way those work is we call it zero is a hero, which is not a bad thing. If the market, they're usually based on an index. On the market, there's several different indexes they may use, but it's usually based on an index of the market. And they'll give you a certain participation rate of that particular index. So if the market was to give you 10% returns or did 10% returns that year, and their participation rate was 80%, then you're going to get 8% return rather than the 10% in those policies. The other side of it is when the market was to go negative, you would only participate in zero negatives of that. You wouldn't participate in the loss. So it protects your downside when you start talking about IULs. But now when you're looking at IULs to pay off debt and use it for the purposes of paying off debt, we don't want to use that because we want the guarantees of the whole life policy to know when these things are going to be paid off. We don't want the fluctuation that an IUL can bring. And it's a matter of preference. I explain it both ways to people, and they tell me what they prefer. It doesn't matter to me what you use. They both will work. The thing is, it just needs to be structured correctly. That is the biggest piece of it.
Okay, Chris. We got another question that says, in general, should we use multiple policies?
Okay. That's a good example of understanding how to utilize them as a banking system. If you started out with one policy, and I call it your bank because it's your bank when you do this right. You start out with one bank and you get to a point where these can be maxed out. That maximization limit is the limit where we don't want the policy to go above that because the proceeds in the policy become taxable. We don't want that to happen. So we keep it below that limit. That's the modified endowment contract limit, or the MEC limit. Once you reach that limit, and you will reach that limit if you're using it as we're describing to you, or we're teaching to you, excuse me, you will reach that limit in that policy. So once that happens, what we'll show you to do is to open a new bank or start a new policy. So you begin to have multiples of policies or banking systems that you're operating with as you go. As you max out one, you create a new one. You think of it now as you are the owner of your bank. So if you're the owner of a bank and you've got all these depositors coming into your bank to the point where you're like, oh gosh, we don't have enough. We can't accept any more money at this bank. I need you guys to go to another bank because we just can't take any more. Well, what do you need to do at this point? You're the owner. You need to open another bank so you can accommodate what's coming into your bank. So you think of it the same way. You want to get to having multiple banking policies. That's the goal.
I like that. Well, we got another quick question, Chris. What do you mean by being structured correctly?
Okay. In your policy, each policy they have certain costs in them. You've got the cost of insurance, which is, the insurance is your umbrella, so to speak. When we talk about proceeds coming out of these policies tax-free, it's because of that insurance umbrella. And that's why there are certain limitations on it that IRS allows you to go up to before they say, oh, well, hey, your cash in is going to be taxable because you've exceeded that limitation. So when the policies are structured, and I can best give you an example of this for those of you who have purchased a policy before, and it not being a banking policy. If you look at your illustration, usually what you'll see is a zero balance of cash the first 2 years, 2 to 5 years. You have a zero balance or very little cash based on how much you're putting into the policy. Well, that is not a banking policy. That is a policy that is structured for insurance. And there's nothing wrong with those. If the purpose of the policy is simply for you to have insurance and not cash, then sure, you want most of your money going toward paying for insurance. So you're not going to have as much cash in it. But for banking policies, we want that first year level to be somewhere around 65% of your premium. So if you put in $1,000 premium that year, we want you to have at least $650 available to you to use it. 65% of it. That's a structured policy. That's a policy that has been structured correctly that you can use it for banking. Now, the other side of that is the company that you're using has to allow you to be able to use it in the purpose of what we're describing. Some companies have certain limitations on how much you can borrow each year or when you can actually borrow money against your cash that's in that policy. So you have to be very careful about the type of company you're using. Not only does it need to be structured correctly, it needs to be with a company that understands that you're using it for that purpose. Okay? Because they can say, well, no, you've borrowed more than we will allow this year, so we're not going to let you borrow anymore. That could happen because you're not with the right company.